One of our ideas here at Nomad Capitalist is that if you've already built wealth, you don't need to stay in California or New York or London or Sydney or anywhere else that has fewer freedoms, higher taxes, more regulations. And yet people continue to think that the place that got them there needs to be the one they stay with. I'm going to share with you why California is not the best place to build wealth. I was recently watching Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary talk about how he's moving his companies out of California, how he would never move there, never invest there, and that flies directly in the face of this common logic we got a comment about today, which says New York and California are the states with the most billionaires, but also the highest tax burdens, with New York City being number one and California in the top 10. Is it a paradox, or are most of these billionaires' wealth created by IPOs in favorable wealth-generating environments? Do lower taxes outside the U.S. allow you to accelerate the growth of your net worth because you keep more? Too much of a puzzle to analyze. Now, if it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson, the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consultancy that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs who want to legally reduce their tax, diversify and protect their assets, and increase their freedom with things like second passports overseas. We also host the biggest and best offshore conference open to everybody called Nomad Capitalist Live. And this is this idea where, number one, people are trying to move to New York, trying to move to California, trying to move to the US, Canada, Australia, other countries in the Western world to generate wealth in the first place. Our client base over the years has shown that that's not necessarily true. We've had everyone from 23-year-old Egyptians building multi-million-dollar e-commerce stores, people in Morocco building multi-million-dollar consulting and social media agencies, people doing all kinds of big businesses in Serbia, in Thailand, in Colombia, in Brazil, in African countries, in Eastern European, all over the world. People are making money. It's the most democratized environment to be able to become successful and to be entrepreneurial for many folks. And you can start with literally a few dollars in many places. But what I would push back on is this idea where this commenter is saying, basically, it's worth paying higher taxes. Like, that's the price that you're supposed to pay with no analysis, as he says. There's no real, like, hey, are you going to make more money here? But it's possible, so why take the chance of going somewhere else? Because you have basically billionaires who have IPOs, thanks to the stock market run up. Like, that's the reason those people are in New York and California. Is that why those places are successful? Are those places generating successful people? Or is it a matter of people who started companies happen to live in Silicon Valley? Now, my thought on this is, first of all, the number of us who run much more niche businesses that may never be unicorns, may never have $100 billion valuations, may never have some of the big numbers that Silicon Valley or New York, what have you, Wall Street puts on these things. But for me, as someone who's more security-minded, I've never understood the go big or die trying when I look at people out there who, if they merely reduce their tax burden, could pocket a lot more of that $2, $5, $10 million a year that their services business, their e-commerce business, or their agency, or whatever it is that they're doing, all kinds of different businesses we work with, if they were able to only reduce that tax burden, and rather than putting 6 out of 10 million in their pocket, put $9.5 million in their pocket, then that allows you to get to, let's say, $50 million, or let's say ultra high net worth individual status, $30 million. You get there a lot faster. And so the idea that that's a relatively straightforward thing to do for a lot of business owners, especially when they reduce costs, reduce friction, and reduce taxation, you can get there faster. I would rather take a much more certain path to getting to $30, $50, $100 million than saying, I'm going to roll the dice and hope that my new startup becomes a unicorn, or that I'm going to be the next Jeff Bezos. I think a lot of businesses that the average person is running that is living in California, living in New York, perhaps the one that you're running, or if you're an investor, you're making investments, all right, you don't need to be in that place to do that. You don't necessarily need to be in Silicon Valley. And so one of the challenges that I've seen when working with clientele who are trying to raise money, it is harder to offshore business because a lot of investors say, hey, we want this Delaware C Corp. We've put together some structures with our various CPAs and lawyers over the years to help people who they want to be overseas, but the investors still want that U.S. connection. There are things that you can do, but what are the investors going to allow you to do? And so, again, are you only going to be successful because you can raise money in the Valley? And is that a thing where you have to be in Silicon Valley to do that at a time when there are more pockets of money where people want to invest in other places around the world? And so are you going to basically doom yourself to pay at least some higher level of tax because you won't go where you're treated best in order to satisfy your investors? The other thing is business partners. If your business partners won't go offshore, that makes it more complicated. Potentially still doable, put some restrictions around you for offshoring your business. So partners and investors are the things that really, in my opinion, slow people down. And then what I've seen is people coming to us when they have a business, just had one recently, it's like $400 million valuation. if they want to leave their country now, there's going to be a high cost to do that. They're going to have to sell part of that business, in all likelihood, to fund their exit. Or they're going to have to get creative, which in their particular case isn't really that advisable. And so the idea, legally creative, of course, but having investors, having the kind of things that come with the New Yorks and the Californias, the reason that people think that they need to have their businesses there, to me, only reduce the odds of that kind of more certain outcome of $30, $50, $100 million by simply banking money, by simply being able to reinvest more of your money because it's not going out the door in taxes to New York and California. So the idea that they're somehow creating some environment may have been the truth in the past, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. Now, one of the things that the commenter says is quality of life. And in my perspective, one of the things that I've found with a lot of entrepreneurs that we've worked with is when they get out of the environment, I don't want to say the rat race, because that certainly, we are all hustling if we're entrepreneurs. But when you get out of an environment with poor quality food, with a lot of people in California say, hey, friendships, aren't that strong, and you go to a place where you have more camaraderie, you go to a place where you have stronger friendships, you go to a place where you have higher quality food, where you're living intentionally in a way that maybe you couldn't do in your home country. I think we have to stop equating offshore with, I'm making a sacrifice. I don't want to live in California, and quite frankly, the 7 months that I did live in California, I would drive on the I-10 freeway every day and think I was driving on the surface of the moon, or that I got a flat tire. It's just not well kept. It is a marketing play. And so if you're running a business there, you've been marketed to that, hey, this is the great place to be, and that you have to be there for the Valley, or now it's in Venice, or whatever. I think we have to stop thinking that going to Singapore, going to Dubai, going to London, which has some tax incentives for foreigners, going to Dublin, similar situation, tax incentives for foreigners, even going to the Cayman Islands. These are not sacrifices. In fact, for a lot of us, I think the idea of living in Dublin, Ireland, with better taxes and everything else that comes with that is more appealing than living in Dublin, California. And so quality of life, quite frankly, is no better in New York and California. It is the marketing mirage, in my opinion, that makes people think that that's the case. So if you run a business where you're just kind of putting money back into the business, you're going to be a lot better off being outside of one of those environments. Other benefits that you are going to have is that you're seeing a lot of companies. I just see, for example, in Armenia, we work with folks in the investment agency there, and they're always telling us about, here's the new company that's bringing people. I think NVIDIA was coming in. Lots of big name companies are outsourcing, including some companies even from India, in a hat tip to how affordable it is there. These companies are outsourcing, and so they're doing internationalization, as it were. Now, again, NVIDIA, huge company. Some other companies, huge companies. But if you're running a company where you've got a headcount of 50 or 100 or 200, especially in development space, for example, what would be so wrong with you being nearby your development team or your staff? In Dubai, for example, you coordinate that with a company in Armenia or whatever it is that your staff are going to be based. People are already, and companies are already moving staff overseas. And so if the argument is only New York, only California, it's harder to import talent, really, than it ever has been, into those places. And so it's a lot easier to import talent into a place like a Dubai. It's a lot easier to get residence and even citizenship in places where you go and hire 1, 3, 5, 10, 50 people. And so taking advantage of offshoring for all the normal reasons, as well as for potential tax benefits, as well as for potential residence and citizenship, which no one talks about, to me, are the benefits that if your team is offshore, why do you need to be in California? And I certainly also think that it's easier to grow a truly international business that's well diversified without just being in kind of the echo chamber of some particular place in the US or whatever Western country that you're in. And so I ask myself, would Nomad Capitalist be bigger if I were still living in the United States and I were paying, I could have moved to a zero tax state, which I suppose I would have at some point. I was paying somewhere in the 40s in taxes, soup to nuts. Would the business be bigger? Because certainly you could argue, well, I could hang out with more people, I could. And in most cases, by the way, you can go back to the US, go back to the UK. You can go wherever you needed to go as a tourist, or if it's your country, you can go for a certain amount of time, still enjoy tax benefits. There's obviously a lot of caveats there. But for someone like me who just doesn't go to the US, am I missing out because I'm not at the Bitcoin conference or because I'm not speaking somewhere? And you could make that argument. Again, I think it comes down to the very thing that this commenter mentioned, which is quality of life. I think that the quality of life outside of the U.S., from a psychological perspective these days, from a just all perspectives, really, again, food and just everything, day to day, freedom, is worth, for me, avoiding. And I think that nourishing yourself as a founder has a value to where there's just so much negativity in my perspective in many places in the West. There's so much negativity against you as a successful entrepreneur that it's better to avoid that. And so I don't know that I would be bigger, were I to be in the U.S. I don't know that our particular business would be very authentic if I and potentially a team were sitting in the United States saying, you got to get out of the United States, or, hey, we'll help you get out of the United States if you want to. You can go back to attend conferences. You can go back to potentially make a sale. These things all need to be factored into your tax plan because they could potentially be events that change your tax situation. And so I think that understanding that you're always going to miss some opportunities is potentially worthwhile. For me, for the average business, this idea that all the billionaires in California, I don't want to say like, oh, you can't be a billionaire. I think that if you look at, someone like a Jeff Bezos, potentially you're as smart as Jeff Bezos, but he just has better operational execution. He makes better executive decisions. He does so at scale, and maybe you get there, maybe you don't. But to me, the certainty of making sure that I'm covered in a much more certain environment, if I'm not going to be Jeff Bezos, if I'm going to be one of the thousands that have failed to become Jeff Bezos, I'd rather have the much more stable money in the bank to be able to go out and do the next thing, to be able to support my lifestyle, to be able to do whatever I want. And for me, that's the difference of being offshore rather than being in California or New York, and the idea that you have to be there to generate wealth or keep your wealth, especially if you're running an international business, especially if you're investing in markets that don't require physical presence, especially if any of those things in this modern age, I think it's much overrated.